Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you are just joining us, we have a number of people joining us. It's just a minute after 12, so we'll get started any moment now. Glad to virtually see so many of you here. We both are on Zoom right now, so some of you are joining us by Zoom and some of you are joining us on Facebook Live. So as we see people still coming in, I'm glad to see all of you here. Glad to welcome you again to a learning lunch. Today, our learning lunch is featuring one of our own staff members, someone that you have seen many times if you have come to learning lunches before, if you've been around the museum, and that is our Assistant Curator of Education, Scott Corcoran. So Jennifer is going to introduce him in just a few minutes, but before that, and as people continue to come in, I'm going to make just a few announcements. The first thing is that the museum is open. We are so happy that the museum is once again open to the public, and visiting the museum is a really great socially distant thing to do. And of course, like everywhere else, we require visitors to wear masks. We have enhanced sanitation protocols. So this is a great place. It's very easy to maintain social distance here. So if you're ready for an outing, then we would of course love to see you. You'll also be interested that our special exhibition, Ancient Rome, the Empire That Shaped the World, which has really been such a wonderful, really well-received exhibition, it has been extended through Labor Day, through September 7th. So would encourage you to see this amazing exhibition before it leaves. I will also tell you, and I guess really in some ways announce for the first time, a new small exhibit that is opening on August 6th called The Art of War, Trench Art of World War II. And so trench art is a term that's used to mean any art that's made from the implements of war. So in this exhibition, for example, carved shell casings, just as an example, made by soldiers in World War II. All sorts of different implements of war, kind of welded, etched in all sorts of different ways to become really art objects. So that exhibit opens on August 6th and will be here through October 11th. So be sure to stop by sometime and then. We're also offering history to go kits. So if you know of someone that might like a free kit, of all different sorts of activities. These can be picked up at the admissions desk. They're totally free. You can drive by, grab it, and go. It's a kit, it's a bag with lots of hands-on activities, like for example, making quill pens, based on artifacts in our collection, and you have every single supply you need and instructions for children to make these and to make that process really seamless. So history to go kits, you can get more information by calling Jennifer or by calling the front desk. And then finally, as always, memberships are always a great way to support the museum. And we so appreciate, so many people have continued to join the museum in the last few months, and we appreciate that support tremendously. Memberships provide free admission for a year, as well as invitations to members only special events once we get back to doing those. We've also extended memberships that were set to expire in the last 2 months, or in the last several months we've extended because of our closure. So if you want more information on that, you can call, come by, or check the museum's website. Once again, welcome to everyone. So glad to see all of you here, whether you're joining us by Zoom or on Facebook Live. I'm going to turn it over now to Jennifer, who is going to introduce Scott today.
Thank you, Meg. I'm so pleased to introduce Scott today. You know, he's my colleague, so I'm proud of him. Let me tell you a little bit about him before we begin. Scott grew up in Mobile and went to Davidson High School. He received his bachelor's degree in history and a master's in education from the University of South Alabama. He's a former history teacher in the Mobile County Public School System. Currently, he serves as Assistant Curator of Education at the History Museum of Mobile. In this role, he has delivered tours to thousands of area school children and spoken to many community groups on a variety of topics related to Mobile's history. He lives in Saraland with his wife and 3 children, and at this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to him.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. As we just saw, I want to thank everybody for coming or joining in, and also kind of bear with us. This is the first time we have tried anything like this, so if we come across any other technical glitches, just show us a little patience as we're learning together. But again, I want to welcome everybody to our kind of collective endeavor on tempting fate as we discuss Hurricane Frederic and its history, legacy through Mobile. Want to tell everybody we will have a little Q&A section at the end. If you're on Zoom, feel free to enter in your questions on the chat feature. If you're on Facebook, in the comments section, and at the end we will we'll get to those and address as many as we can. But today we are discussing Hurricane Frederic. So a brief overview. Where'd I go? Okay. Initial U.S. landfall was late on the evening, September 12th, 1979 on Dolphin Island before traveling to Biola Battery. Damage caused by Frederick's estimated to be about $2.2 billion, 1979 dollars. That's roughly $7.8 billion today. And one of the other unique aspects of Frederic is it was the first real test of FEMA, as that agency was established in April of 1979. So we'll start at looking at the path of Frederic. On August 28, 1979, a tropical depression formed off the coast of Africa. The storm grew rapidly in strength, becoming a tropical storm the next day on August 30th. And then 2 days later, on September 1st, it had reached hurricane intensity. Now, before I keep talking about Frederic, it's important that I discuss a little bit about Hurricane David. Hurricane David formed just a few days before Frederic and followed a similar path before turning up the Atlantic coast. Now, one of the reasons this is really important is because the outflow, the kind of energy consumed and then kicked back out into the waters from David, it actually weakened Frederic as Frederic was passing through the Caribbean. Frederic was only a hurricane for 18 hours at this point before being downgraded again. Now, when David hit the Dominican Republic, it hit as a Category 5 hurricane, which as it moved up the Florida coast, got a lot of people worried and focused on Hurricane David as it was moving. And since Hurricane Frederic was weakening, the attention to David kind of deflected from attention on Frederic as it was going. Now, the National Hurricane Center actually received criticism for the way it handled David, because by the time David had hit Florida, it had downgraded to, or I'm sorry, hit Georgia, it had downgraded to a minor hurricane. So people had been prepared for this Category 5 that hit the Dominican Republic, but David had weakened by the time it reached Georgia. So some people say that a lack of attention on Frederic was also a result of David fatigue. Another thing about Hurricane David, because I have to establish my geek credentials as much as my nerd credentials, as Hurricane David skirted up the coast of Florida, it passed by a suburb of Fort Lauderdale called Davie, Florida, where it interrupted the filming of Caddyshack at the Rolling Hills Country Club in that city. So it interrupted the filming of Caddyshack for about 3 days. But after David, as Frederic was going, when the storm went over Hispaniola in Cuba, interaction with the land as well as the outflow of David kept Frederic from strengthening. It went across it nearly dissipated the storm, downgrading it to a tropical depression once again by September 6th. Now, as it passed over the Isle of Youth in western Cuba and into the warm Gulf waters, it began reorganization. Frederic remained a depression for the next 4 days until September 9th, when it passed over western Cuba. The National Hurricane Center once again upgraded Frederic to a tropical storm. The next day at 5 p.m., it was upgraded to a hurricane. Over the next 36 hours, Frederic intensified from a Category 1 to a Category 4 hurricane with winds reaching 132 miles an hour. Now, as I was putting together this presentation, one of the things I wanted to look at was the forecasts. When these storms start forming in the Atlantic today, we have Alan Seals and Jason Smith and John Nodar coming on the TV telling us, keep an eye on these storms, watch out for them, and we track its progress as it moves into us. Now, one of the things you can see from this chart is that the forecasting today is much more accurate than it was 41 years ago. Looking at the chart, you can see the forecast error, the range they, off on this. In 1979, for 1 day, was about 125 miles an hour. That's the same forecast error we have today with 72 hours out. Like I said, I was wanting to see the forecast, but there just wasn't a whole lot. One, because of David and the attention paid to it, but two, they just didn't know. You didn't see your first, big kind of highlighted news stories about Frederic until the afternoon of the 11th, the morning of the 12th. We're talking, 24 to 18 hours ahead of the storm. On September 12th, National Hurricane Center forecaster Miles Lawrence said, you realize our forecast error is about 100 miles. So as the storm began to grow and approach and everybody took notice, news outlets and government agencies began warning people of the danger of Frederic as it approached. The Mobile County Red Cross put local disaster action teams on standby to be mobilized. The Red Cross Alabama Division offices in Birmingham dispatched 40 disaster specialists and 20 disaster vehicles to Mobile. Mobile County Civil Defense, the predecessor of Mobile County Emergency Management Agency today, coordinated with Mobile County Public School System to make sure schools were available as shelters all over the county. Azalea Middle, now Benton Middle School, Theodore Davidson were all used as shelters. Even the University of Mobile, or as it was known then, Mobile College, was used as a shelter. They issued at 5 a.m. on September 12th, again, what are we talking about? 17 hours before the storm hit, the National Weather Service issued hurricane warnings from Panama City, Florida to Grand Isle, Louisiana. That's a distance of about 260 miles as the crow flies, warning people about this storm. The 260 miles was the best guess they had, again, 17 hours out of the storm's landfall. Now, some didn't recognize the severity of the storm, and those of us in Mobile know the people who, are constantly, I've been through these storms, I know these storms, everything's, but Dr. E.B. Quarles of the Dauphin Island Volunteer Fire and Rescue Squad stated that they were doing nothing special in way of preparations, but were on alert in case the storm shifted towards the island. Now, this is going to become very ironic in a little bit. Hurricane shelters in Mobile County housed 20,000 people during the storm, and shelters at Azalea, Davidson, and Theodore endured extensive damage during the storm. Now, just before landfall, Frederic reached its top sustained winds of 132 miles an hour. It made its first landfall on Dolphin Island just before 10 p.m. on September 12th. The Dolphin Island Bridge recorded a peak gust of 145 miles an hour before the anemometer was wrecked by the winds. About an hour after it hit Dolphin Island, it hit Beulah Battery, making it its second landfall. And the lowest pressure recorded during the storm was at Dolphin Island of 943 millibars. Now, Frederic then tore through the U.S. for the next 2 days. The storm retained its strength, lasting as a hurricane until it reached Meridian, Mississippi. That's about 150 miles inland along the Alabama-Mississippi border. Hurricane level winds were reported as far as 90 miles west of Mobile and 20 miles east of Pensacola. And 80 miles of Gulf Coast from Mississippi to Florida would receive storm surge damage. Nobody worse, though, than Dolphin Island. Frederic hit Dolphin Island around 10 p.m. on September 12th. 145 mile an hour gusts were recorded on the island, and it was hit with 12 to 15 foot storm surge. Now, I know this picture is a little difficult to make out, but this is a view of Dolphin Island. Top of the picture being north, bottom of the picture being the Gulf side of the island. The houses along, that's where the coast was. The storm surge, as it rolled over Dolphin Island, pulled all that material north of the island. And this is Ben Berger as he stands among the wreckage of his Dolphin Island store, Ship and Shore. Berger and 4 others, including Dr. E.B. Quarles, I mentioned before, rode the storm out in this store. They said as the storm reached its peak intensity, they took shelter in the coolers, which you can see above Mr. Berger's shoulders on the right side of the picture there. This is an aerial view of damage done at Dolphin Island. Damage done to the Dolphin Island Marina. And to folks of a certain generation, mine, this is a very foreign picture. This is the Dolphin Island Bridge, the original Dolphin Island Bridge. Now, the original bridge opened on July 2nd, 1955, and it was the first time the island was directly reachable by vehicle, not boat or ferry. The storm surge from Frederic lifted the concrete pads that made up the bridge's roadway and deposited them miles north or yards north of the bridge. The only thing that was left standing was the bridge lift that you can see, but it was heavily damaged. As the storm moved past Dolphin Island into South Mobile County, Bellingrath Gardens was directly in the path of the storm and was devastated. It took an estimated of $6 million in damage. They lost more than 1,000 pine trees, 330 water oaks, and 15 live oaks. The gardens would not reopen until March of the following year. The USS Alabama facility also saw some damage. This is the guest center at the memorial. Also, the ramp leading to the USS Drum was sheared from the submarine. And then one of the most unique features of the Alabama is the Kingfisher plane. On the left-hand picture, you can see it mounted on its launch arm, sitting on its pontoon. The right picture, you can see the launch arm still there, pontoon still on the launch arm, and the plane off to the side as if it had been thrown by a child. Now, this plane, it's one of only 10 10 Kingfisher planes known to exist in collections around the world. Again, I want to take a second for folks who have joined us late. We are going to be taking questions at the end of the program. If you're on Facebook Live, feel free to type in your question in the comments section. We'll get to it at the end. And same thing with Zoom, using the chat feature. We'll get to as many as we can with the time we have left. But Mobile proper received an extensive amount of damage from the storm because it was in the most dangerous northeast quadrant of the storm. Old Providence Hospital, or as it was known at the time, Providence Hospital, had almost all its windows blown out and several trees toppled into its emergency entrance. This is the Chandler White House at the intersection of Church and Joachim, kind of across Church Street from where Government Plaza is now. The building is still there, but you can see the damage it took. Port Trinity Episcopal Church received a great deal of damage from the storm as well. This is the Mahale building. It sat at the intersection of Conti and Jackson. This building is where, or was where, Cathedral Square is today. You can see damage to storefronts on Dolphin Street. And then the Admiral Sims statue at its original Government and Water Street location had been sheared from its pedestal by the storm. And then the Order of Polka Dots float barn. This is kind of a tragic story in and of itself, because as the storm was coming, the Polka Dots insurance agents suggested they increase their coverage. By a 5-3 vote, the Polka Dots declined to increase this insurance coverage. This is going to come in a little later as part of the recovery. West Mobile neighborhoods, you can see all the pine trees kind of blown in the direction of Frederic's wind. And then the south side of Old City Hall, what is today the History Museum of Mobile. You can see the extensive damage done to the roof, what is now our collections department. Luckily, though, if you look the second window off Royal Street, that is my office where I am right now, and it clearly made it through unscathed. Now, total damage in Mobile County, these are structures that were either destroyed or sustained major damage. 3,850 homes, over 5,500 mobile homes, almost 500 apartment units, and 31 small businesses were totally destroyed. Almost 34,000 families suffered some form of financial loss from Frederic's damage. Additionally, as I was putting this together and talking to members of the community, one of the stories I heard repeated over and over were storm damaged schools. A lot of them were shut down for weeks, enduring repairs from damage of the storm. A lot of students in these schools would have to attend school on Saturday to make up for missed instructional time. And folks of a certain age, certain generation would kind of often tell me that this was their biggest memory from Frederic, having to go to school on Saturdays as a result. But in total, 11 Alabama counties were declared disaster areas as a result. Immediately after the storm, local, state, and federal officials began to assess damage and direct recovery resources. Even after Mobile County Civil Defense was able to gain communication with Dolphin Island, because of the extensive damage to roads, it actually took longer to reestablish contact with Biola Battery and Grand Bay. The Mobile Register was even unable to publish for 2 days following the storm, but as they began republishing again, 3 days later, it was said shelters at Alba High and Davidson remained open. Alabama Governor Fob James arrived in Mobile on September 12th and set up a command center in Spanish Fort. He led state resources, including National Guard deployment. At the peak, 936 Guard members were placed on active duty in Mobile County. National Guard members were used to aid local police, assist in cleanup, and help rebuild damaged structures. Looting was a huge issue people were concerned about, though. This led to a 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. curfew for Mobile during the immediate aftermath of the storm. Pritchard Police Chief A.J. Cooper even went as far as to give orders to his officers, fire 2 warning shots, and then authorized to shoot to kill in instances of looting. During the first 2 days after the storm, 25 people were arrested for looting, and Governor James issued similarly stern warnings to many media outlets during the storm's immediate aftermath. Now, 2 days after the storm, on the morning of September 14th, President Carter arrived in Mobile to survey the damage. In the photograph on the left, you can see Alabama Governor Fob James standing next to President Carter, and next to President Carter are Senators Hal Heflin of Alabama, Bob Graham of Florida, and Cliff Finch of Mississippi. Carter then toured the areas from Pascagoula to Panama City and declared the areas hit as federal disaster areas. This allowed for immediate aid, immediate deployment of federal resources. Now, this includes FEMA. FEMA was established in April of 1979, making Frederic the first real test of the new agency. FEMA directed $380 million towards Frederic recovery along the Gulf Coast, $250 million of that in Alabama alone. In the immediate aftermath, FEMA provided temporary housing, low-interest loans for homeowners and businesses, grants for public building, aids for farmers. They would even oversee like a reestablished ferry service for Dolphin Island. Over 50,000 people sought some form of assistance through FEMA, and FEMA oversaw a collection of federal agencies, including the Small Business Administration for business loans, Federal Housing Administration loans, federal insurance, and the Corps of Engineers. Now, FEMA numbers don't include other independent agencies like the Emergency Conservation Program, Emergency Food Stamps, and Disaster Unemployment Assistance. Relief from these organizations totaled an additional $213 million. Now, this was at a time before, computerized phone banks or the internet. So waiting for federal and state assistance meant waiting in long lines. And, if you're from this area, September is not the beginning of fall here. So this was hot, humid, and having to wait for hours in these lines. Now, the American Red Cross disaster teams quickly began assisting residents in determining needs. Now, one of the other things about the Red Cross is since they had the infrastructure in place and were able to put boots on the ground quickly than just about any other agency, the American Red Cross, through their mission, was actually able to also collect data that helped the government's summary damage assessment report. A lot of the data for that report was collected and provided directly from the Red Cross. Power lines were destroyed across the area. About 145,000 people in Mobile lost power. Many residents had power restored within two weeks. However, many in outlying areas and in the suburbs reported as long as 6 weeks to get power restored. Alabama Power immediately brought in 1,100 crew members from all over the Southeast to assist with repairs. Of the 1,100 workers, only 200 were from Mobile. The rest were from North Alabama and Georgia. And as communities like Birmingham and Montgomery that saw some damage but not as extensive or widespread, as they had finished up their repairs, those crews were sent down to Mobile as well. 12 days after the storm on September 12th, the number of Alabama Power crew members was over 2,100. Because of the power and other issues, essential goods became valuable commodities in the days following Frederic. This picture is of the Crystal Ice Warehouse on Broad Street. You can see the line extending along Broad Street for people waiting to get ice. Beyond food and ice, items like power tools and generators were quickly sold out. You would have people come in and, stop in Knoxville, Tennessee and clean out everything they could and then bring semi-trucks down to Mobile to sell the equipment. There was a lot of issues involving price gouging. Some reporting bags of ice, again in 1979, being sold for upwards of $5. However, as a result of some of the damage too and the increase in power tools being used, Mobile hospitals reported a significant number of emergency room visits due to improper use of power tools. The few stores that were able to service customers quickly saw long lines grow for basic supplies. 3 days after the storm, and this is a very old-fashioned sentence, 6 Delchamps locations had reopened. But due to road damage, they were having supply issues, so they just couldn't maintain demand. Additionally, some stores without power would just give away perishables instead of letting them rot in the coolers. You heard stories of the Winn-Dixie on Broad Street as the windows had been blown out. They were just throwing the meat out these windows for people to get and use instead of, again, just letting them go to waste. And city cleaning crews worked around the clock clearing roads. And this wasn't just for, to allow residents to be able to gain access to the roads. It was for the supply lines for stores. It was for power companies to be able to have access. Again, want to make one last just kind of for folks who may have joined in late. We will be doing questions at the end of the presentation. If you're on Facebook Live, just enter your question in the comments section on Zoom in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Now, one of the things I found most interesting as I was putting this together is through everything, Mobile was able to retain a lot of what makes Mobile Mobile and were able to keep their sense of humor. You saw the boards boarding up broken windows quite often being decorated with slogans such as "This Business," "Remodeling and Landscaping done by Frederic." This next one might be my favorite. "Deerwood Neighborhood Yard of the Month." And then, "Fred is dead, but we're still here." Now, Bellingraph Gardens reopened to the public on March 1st, 1980, after having to do extensive renovations. One of the most significant impacts of the storms was due to the widespread tree damage at the gardens. They lost all the shade trees. They had to shift from shade-thriving plants to those that did better in direct sunlight. So it actually had to change the botanical composition of Bellingrath Gardens due to the changes. At a cost of $33 million, the new Dolphin Island Bridge opened on July of 1982. And the major Gulf Shores condominium complex was destroyed by Frederic. And that is not a typo. Single complex. Baldwin County's coast was mainly single-family homes sitting behind dunes before Frederic. Those homes were destroyed by the storm. The stretches of now undeveloped land and the attention Gulf Shores received from the news media led to an explosion in coastal development. 80% of Gulf Shores buildings were destroyed, including the picture you see on the left, the major condo complex at Gulf Shores at the time. This attention and the available coastline led to an explosion in Gulf Shores development. In 1992, National Hurricane Center Director Robert Sheets described in testimony to Congress that when Frederic hit, there was one condo complex in Gulf Shores. 13 years later, 1992, there were 104 complexes along the Gulf Shores coastline, and we can see how that has continued even to this day. You've seen pictures of the damage done to City Hall. Well, during the rebuilding of City Hall, which actually was a debate in and of itself, people were debating that at the time the 120-year-old building might have outseen its usefulness, and there was some debate as to just totally tearing City Hall down and rebuilding anew. But with the history of the building and the pride Mobile takes in its history, they decided to reconstruct and renovate the City Hall. During the time City Hall was under renovations, municipal offices were moved to Dolphin and I-65 in what is now the Infirmary 65 building. Renovation to City Hall cost $4.3 million and took roughly 3.5 years to complete. Some staffers began moving back into their offices in December 1982, but construction wasn't fully completed until February 27th, 1983. Now, while Mobile saw about $1 billion in damage from Hurricane Frederic, it received about $525 million in direct recovery funds, 310 from FEMA agencies, 213 in government private disaster aid, and then there was 64 million additionally in insurance claims. Now, while that's only about half of the loss Mobile took, one thing that happened though was this $525 million was injected directly at one time period. So this aid actually increased tax revenues by about 12 million, not including the growth in taxes from the newly improved renovated properties that had been damaged by Frederic when they would be rebuilt or renovated with upgrades that increase property values, increasing the tax revenue as well. As well as the improvement of destroyed downtown properties and use of some of this tax revenue led to an urban renewal of downtown Mobile. A lot of the property owners in downtown would take the insurance money and rebuild what a lot of times had been dilapidated buildings, and were able to bring new life to them as a direct result of the funding coming in. A lot of economists have said that the string of pearls in the late 80s, including the convention center, the development of the Dolphin Street Entertainment District, actually wouldn't have been possible without the impact of Frederic. But there's one other part of Frederic I'd want to talk about, and that's Mardi Gras in 1980. It was held 5 months after the devastation of Frederic. And I told you about the Polka Dots float barn and the damage they saw. But the Mystic Societies were determined to return Mobile to a sense of normalcy. Several float barns received some damage, but none more so than the Polka Dots. As a result, the Conde Cavaliers, the Order of Inca, and the crew of Columbus all pitched in to help the Polka Dots. Despite all the devastation, no parades were canceled that year. And as can be expected, the Comic Cowboys had a great deal of fun with Frederic Mardi Gras that year as well. Some floats had signs reading things like, September 12th, the lights went out in City Hall and no one noticed. Insurance adjuster, anybody out of work who can read fine print. Contractor, any idiot from out of town with a hammer. And professional tree surgeon, redneck with a chainsaw. And while unrelated to Frederic, the Mardi Gras of 1980 was also another significant Mardi Gras in that it was the last Mardi Gras seen by Julian Lee Rayford. Rayford had brought in the Joe Cane tradition and the Joe Cane Day tradition, and he took on the mantle of Chief Slackabama-Renico in the years following. From 1967 to 1970, he portrayed Chief Slackabama-Renico until 1970 when he passed the feathers, as it's called, to Red Foster. That's the gentleman in the lower left side of the picture next to Rayford. He continued on as Chief Slackabama-Renico until he passed the feathers to Wayne Dean in 1985. Dean is currently Chief Slackabama-Renico, and he is the on the left side of this picture in the jester outfit. So this is the last Mardi Gras where all three, at the time and future Chief Slackabama-Renicos. But Mardi Gras 1980 was a big part in what brought Mobile back and restored. Now, forgive me for a little pitch, but exhibits that tell the story of Mobile's history, including Hurricane Frederic, in extensive detail are available at the History Museum of Mobile. The museum is located at 111 South Royal Street across from Mardi Gras Park. And we really encourage anybody who's, looking for an escape from the house to come and be socially distant here with us. So with that, as I promised throughout, do we have any questions today? And Stephanie needs to unmute you, Meg. Again, we're learning as well, so bear with us.
Hey, well, first of all, let me speak for everyone in saying thank you so much, Scott, for a fascinating presentation. Really wonderful. We have so enjoyed it. I have one question for you, and we'll see if there's some others that come in. I have a couple questions. But the first question really, though, is that in the years before Frederic, were there the broad public campaigns around preparedness that we see today? So today we see these big ad campaigns about, keep 2 weeks of canned goods on hand and fill your bathtub with water and those sorts of things. Just looking at those really long lines, I'm curious if there were similar preparedness campaigns before Frederic.
I can't say that there wasn't. What I can say is, as I was doing research on this, I never came across anything like that. I didn't see the tax-free holidays and making sure you had all your batteries and your flashlights and your water. I'm not saying it isn't there, but one of the things, a supposition is because of the lack of heads up, because they didn't have the week or 2 week long, notice that they really didn't know where these storms were going to be till minimum 48 hours. I just don't think there was the focus on it because they were surprises more so than they are today.
Well, now this is something, kind of speaking of it being a surprise, something you and I have talked about. Even though at this point it's still hurricane technology, and the point of Frederic had advanced a long way from the 19th century, where and the very early 20th century, where every afternoon thunderstorm might be the end. I wonder if you can speak a little bit to that longer history of hurricanes.
Well, one of the things I've seen is, when you look back at like the big one everybody talks about, the 1900 Galveston hurricane. It's, we've lived in this area, and we know that if you didn't have the TV on, if you didn't have the radio, if you didn't have your phone telling you what was going on, if you had no idea what was brewing in the Gulf, the day before these storms hit, because of all the energy and all the humidity kind of pulled into the storms, the day before these storms hit tends to be some of the most beautiful weather days you'll ever see on the Gulf Coast. It's the kind of day you want to go for a picnic, go to the beach, and enjoy the day. So not only were these storms, they weren't aware of them because they didn't have satellite or radar to tell them what was going on, but the day before these storms hit, there's this appearance of this beautiful weather that really encourages people to do anything but prepare for a devastating, life-changing storm. The development of radar in the 30s and 40s, satellite technology as it grew through the 70s and 80s into, dual Doppler 3000 we have today, has really changed the way we see and can prepare for these storms versus, even 75 to 100 years ago.
Thank you so much for that, Scott. All right, we have a question on Facebook from Pam, who wants to know if you have any personal recollections or memories of Frederic.
No. I was about 15 months old when Frederic hit, and my family hadn't moved to the area yet. Thankfully, because my younger sister, her birthday is September 11th, 1979. So, but I have heard stories, friends of mine in high school who, talked about, or talking with their parents about the storm and what had happened, and talking about having, year-old kids or newborns during the time. And yeah, just horrible, having to deal with no power, limited water, no real access for 2 to 6 weeks. I can't even imagine.
We have one other question for now, and if people keep typing them in, we've got a few more minutes. This question is if Mobile made any significant changes or actions for future storms because of Frederic. So whether that's policy or preparedness, or even in the attitude towards future storms, if there were significant changes after Frederic.
One of the biggest ones was the evolution of the Mobile Civil Defense, how it had been primarily focused on, a lot of it was kind of World War II era legacy, preparing for, German U-boat attack or Cold War era nuclear threats. After Frederic, you see the shift from Mobile County Civil Defense to sometime later, and I don't know the exact year, but the Mobile County Emergency Management Agency, where the focus became primarily weather and natural disaster threats. Other things is just, it grew with the technology. The fact that, like I said, we see these storms now brewing off the coast of Africa 2 weeks before they hit. And it, you know, gives us all our little hobby of keeping up with our little hurricane tracking chart, and you know, the warriors in your office kind of making sure everything's in place and having plans, and, you know, talking about closing down the offices and the buildings even a week or two before the storm, when they would have no idea it was coming back then that early.
Right, I'm looking at the questions. I see a lot on Zoom, a lot of people saying, thank you, this was amazing. There's one comment, and I think just speaks some to, you know, on one hand, we're talking about for so many years, and even now with the technology that we have, there's an extraordinary amount of fear that comes around hurricanes. But on the other side, there's a comment as well that having lived through the storm, it says it offered the opportunity to get to know your neighbors. Many of us would break out grills and invite all because the food was going to spoil anyway, this kind of classic hurricane party. So kind of holding these two things in tension, the fear and sometimes the celebration, the very communal aspect of pulling together afterwards.
One of my own personal memories is Hurricane Ivan. I was in my apartment, and I had a buddy came over, and we emptied out my freezer on the grill because power was out, and would sit and eat hot dogs and hamburgers and chicken breast while playing Risk by candlelight outside, because, you know, nothing else to do, nowhere else to go. But it's that type of, again, the communal aspect of it that really, I don't know if it's uniquely Mobile, but I really do think it in my mind kind of defines what Mobile is, by tragedy bringing together community.
Well, I think that is a great note to end on. Thank you again, Scott. We've had over 45 people join us either on Zoom or on Facebook. It will also be posted on Facebook later, so if you missed part of it or want to go back and hear the beginning, it'll be posted on Facebook for even more people to enjoy. So Scott, thank you again so much. Appreciate your taking the time to do this, and hope to have you back soon.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming and giving me the opportunity, and I'm glad that technology held up, so we'll be able to do this as often as we can. So thank y'all very much.